So, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Good evening once again. Jai Jinendra Pranam. Very warm welcome to the panelists and the moderator, Dikshit Bhai, Vishesh Bhai, and Kinar Bhai, and Nishma Ben, the moderator, and of course Mala Ben and Ashish as well. On this very warm Saturday evening. Thank you for taking time out to do what I have looked at the subject, and I think it's a very heavy subject, uh, future of the city, reaching for success. I mean, quite a heavy subject. First, I must apologize on behalf of the president. He had some other commitments, so he could not come in. So he asked me to step in, and I feel honored that I have been asked to just say a few words, and I will try and keep it to a few words. Thank you so much for doing this, because yes, it's a very vital topic, I think, in this day and age, especially with the lockdown, the virus, and people with uncertain futures. City meaning, of course, the financial world out there. And having looked at all your very impressive CVs, and Nishma, then also congratulations, before I forget, for your OBE. Well done. I still remember you calling me back in the 80s when I was doing Oshwal News or something. So I think you were still at university at the time. So wonderful. Kinar, of course, I know very well through his parents and everybody. So I won't take up much of your time, because this is a heavy subject, and I think you guys will do it more justice than I can talk about it. So I will now pass over to Malaben, and let's take it from there. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Vice President Kaushik Bhai. Pranam, Bhayo, Beno, Prathamara Khas Vadilo. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one of the online events for Oshwal Association in UK. Today, I am so privileged to be here in presence of all of you, and including a dynamic panel speakers. I'm delighted that we have a global and vast audience joining us tonight and actually supporting me in the passion I have for the next generation of successful individuals. Many of you may know Nishma Gosrani. She was invested with an OBE in the Queen's New Year 2020 Honours List for services to diversity and inclusion in all aspects of British life. She pioneered gender pay gap reporting and the subsequent changes to the Equality Act. Her added title, Equality Matters, on International Women's Day in 2016 led to a rare ovation, standing ovation from the public at the House of Commons. London-based Nishma Gosrani is a director at Deloitte Consulting and leads people on partnering, transformation in banking, capital markets, and asset management, and a key focus on partnering with clients on the future work agenda. She is a Kenyan born. She was elected the Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in 2008. And whilst on maternity leave in 2016, she was listed as a Financial Times Top 35 Future Leader. She holds a number of trustee and board roles as well. It gives me great pleasure to honor her OBE and a proud moment for the Oshwal community as the youngest recipient of an OBE. So without talking further, I am going to ask Nishma to please open the forum for the future of the city reaching success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malaben, and thank you so much for that very kind and generous introduction. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you, Kaushik Bhai, Ashish Bhai, and our three very esteemed panelists who I will go on to introduce shortly. As a Oshwal member, a proud Oshwal member, and part of a community that I've grown up with over the years, I think this is so important. And service back to the community is an important part of how I live my life. So, as we said, we have three very esteemed panelists from their respective industries and background. And I am so delighted to welcome Dikshit Joshi, Group Treasurer of Deutsche Bank in London. Prior to this, he has held a number of senior roles within Deutsche Bank and across the city. He's a renowned face and one of few faces at a senior level within the banking industry. A real pleasure to have Dikshit on board. We also have Kinna Shah, who is a chartered accountant by profession, and he is the head of finance and control for BP in West Africa, and has spent a huge amount of his time building the organization's expansion in Southeast Asia. We also have Visesh Gosrani, who has 20 years of experience as an actuary and chief risk officer within the insurance industry at Lloyd's of London, one of the managing agencies, Asta. His interest within cyber risk has led him to opening a Silicon Valley-based startup, and he chairs the Institute of Actuaries Cyber Risk Working Party. So a real privilege. And further to that, I mean, I know these three individuals personally, and what we want to get out of today is the real nitty-gritty, no sugarcoating, but really what is the future of the city? We are going through an economic, financial, health, and social crisis. And we have got three esteemed speakers from their industries to talk to us about how they've reached success, the challenges along the way, and what we expect going forward. So, Dikshit, as I said earlier, you are one of very few senior Indian faces within the city, particularly within the banking industry. Tell me your story. Tell our viewers your story.
Ishma, Malaben, Kaushik Bhai, Namaste, Jayinendra. I'm sure my panelists would agree, before I get started, we could equally have just interviewed you for the session, Ishma. It'd be equally interesting to all of the audience. I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid era. My great-grandfather had migrated there with Gandhiji in 1904, which is how I, landed up being born there. Studied there and then moved to London. Really, I started at a bank in South Africa and then moved to London, which is where I built up, much of my banking career. That then led me to, stints in both New York, a number of years in Hong Kong, and then much of the time here. But I'm happy to, share any part of that experience with you, Nishma.
Thank you, Dikshit. Kinna, please tell us a little bit about your story in oil and gas and moving from being an accountant with the Big Four into the industry.
Hello, welcome all, and thank you for inviting me this evening to this discussion. So just a brief overview about me. So I was born and bred here in London in quite a big joint family, and I went through the education system and graduated from Warwick University about 18 years ago. Following on from that, I moved over to Deloitte & Touche, which is what it was called back then, one of the Big Four accountancy firms, gaining my chartered accountancy qualification there before I took a leap of faith and into an industry that really did excite me and is a global player in the world. So I joined BP after qualifying, and that really, with my ACA skills, really provided me the springboard to build up my understanding of commercial and business world and everything that goes with oil and gas. And I guess just to touch upon how, my aim of joining the oil and gas industry was really, for the first 5 to 7 years, was really just to try and get all those fantastic experiences and opportunities across that global business under my belt. So I moved from Algeria to a new startup in Libya, which was a fantastic experience where we were planning to start up an onshore and offshore exploration drilling program. And then thereafter, I was fortunate enough to work on the deal whereby we accessed a strategic stake in the Reliance operations in India. And more recently, where I'm at right now is in Africa. So right now in West Africa, overseeing a groundbreaking development project for LNG, and that's firmly underway. And I guess I'll just finish off that. I guess my career it has taken twists and turns and has evolved with the sector. And I think we are at a pivotal moment in the industry when we think about low carbon energy. So I think lots of exciting opportunities ahead, I hope, as well for my career.
Thank you, Kinner. And Visesh, the life of an actuary. Please give us a few minutes.
I'd say mine has been anything but the typical life of an actuary. I have, well, I spent my first decade with the Big Four, first PwC and then Deloitte. And what I really worked out that I enjoyed from those experiences was going into organizations that were having significant difficulties in some strategic sense and helping them to be part of a turnaround. And so I went to one of my clients, Genworth Financial, at the height of the financial crisis. They were writing mortgage insurance, which was suffering significant losses quarter after quarter. And I helped them to understand much more of the losses that were occurring in their book, and expanded my remit there into the risk environment, which led to an offer to become Chief Risk Officer for Lloyd's of London managing agency, Asta, which was a wonderful way to get much more of a commercial insight and broader insight into the insurance world than an actuary might typically have. Following that, we struck out into consulting and then set up an insurtech, which was thinking about how policyholders truly think about risk. And the problem that insurance has faced, and definitely was facing significantly at that time, was the impact of aggregators, whereby people put the same data into a website and then they receive a quote, and which one wins? Well, one of the cheapest. And this was a way to find out who really was better than what they might say on paper. We were actually then bought by a Silicon Valley startup that was focused on cyber risk in order to apply our IP, and they were bought further then, which allowed us to exit nicely about 18 months later. Following on from that, I've just continued with my passion for trying to differentiate risk and trying to help policyholders to understand risk in the startup space.
Thank you, Visesh. Dikshit, just yesterday, Andrew Bailey, our Bank of England governor, said that the bounce back that we might expect was probably going to be better than we'd initially anticipated. We've heard economists talk about a U, V, and even a crab-like shake recovery. What's your view?
So I think that data, it's important to look at the data here as opposed to, try and go further out, because, it is truly unprecedented. We really don't have a blueprint that we can lean on, and really no amount of research here will be indicative, of where the path would lie. But if you look at the data in countries like Germany, for example, take restaurant sales. Restaurant sales are now well above pre-COVID levels. If you look at, road traffic in many cases in European countries is now at 70% of pre-COVID levels, and that was, at something like 30% of pre-COVID levels before. And so you are seeing a quick recovery in terms of spending, which is great. But just remember, the trough that we went into was particularly severe. So it is my view that yes, we're seeing a faster recovery, but unfortunately, the amount of GDP that we've lost will take a very, very long time to regain. And so I think the sense of optimism is much more that we've bounced. It's not that we're actually making up for all of the sort of losses that we've had. And I think it's going to be noticeable in the default cycle in the credit environment over the next 2 to 3 years. We're just seeing the beginnings of the, sort of that cycle. As I would put it, many of the companies we have, are on life support right now. But, as that life support gets removed, they're going to have to find other ways to manage. And, part of it will be going to administration, coming out of administration leaner, smaller, which unfortunately means a great deal of pain, for the man in the street. And that's really, my concern is not so much the financial markets, which I'm in, which actually have performed fairly well. And it's not really the banking system. in this case, I think this crisis is much more in Main Street than it is in Wall Street.
And Dikshit, you were, you've been through the 2007-8 crisis, right? Many people, perhaps who've joined the call today, will not have seen the 2007-8 crisis. You were instrumental in the Lehman's Nomura Barclays transaction. What do you think is fundamentally different this time round, outside of the fact that it's not focused around the globe rather than just the West?
So, I look back at, actually, all of the others that I've been through, which is, whether it's 94 and then you look at 98 and Russia and the LTCM crisis or the 2001 NASDAQ bubble, and, it just goes on. There's always a crisis in banking. That's one thing we can count on. I would say the big difference here is that as opposed to it being localized to one industry or one country, this is everywhere. And so it's affected everyone all at once. So if you take the NASDAQ crisis, affected just the technology sector, the rest of the S&P 500, the rest of the economy was doing just fine. If you look at the Russian crisis, well, it was only Russia, and so on. The financial crisis really was only about banking in the main, and the real economy was less affected. It's hard to find any, an industry here which is not touched by what's happened. And I think that makes it challenging for policymakers to deal with, because you're putting out fires everywhere at the same time, or you're trying to put out fires everywhere at the same time, which is challenging given the toolkit you have doesn't allow you to deal with that very well.
And Dikshit, if I remember 17 years ago as a graduate, when you were sat in a university campus hall, everybody wanted to go to a Goldman Sachs presentation. Banking was the industry that every graduate wanted to join. And then it's gone through a huge amount of reputational crisis and a large amount of competition from the technology sector, etc. But what we're seeing now is that the banks have declared that they're not going to be taking on graduates for a considerable period of time, let alone their summer vacation students. How do you feel about this, and what's your advice?
So, I think it's incredibly challenging for everyone, including the banks. Banking's done fairly well. If you look at the numbers coming out in the first half of the year, we're actually seeing, in many cases, record numbers in some parts of banking. And again, that's out of kilter with what's been happening really, in the mainstream economy. And partly that's because banks are very well capitalized. So the lessons of 2008, most definitely we've learned from. We have a significant amount of capital. The amount of leverage in the system has been reduced. And as such, banks have not had significant amounts of risk on their books right now. Banks have had to get leaner. So, to your point on sort of the impact of technology, Vishesh is one example, just of how fast technology can move. The difference in banking is banking at its heart is, yes, it's a technology business, but it's technology coupled with a balance sheet and the ability to take risk. If you just want to make a payment, yes, of course, open your Monzo account or your Revolut account or TransferWise or whatever the case may be and make your payment. That's fairly easy. But if you need to finance a shipment that's, you've just purchased and you need to bridge that for 3 months, someone's going to be able to give you financing. Mm-hmm. If you need a deposit on a house and you need to, secure some financing, you're going to need that to take place. You need trade finance, you have corporate banking in the background. You've got your personal banking. If you're a high net individual, you help with, transforming risk for you on your portfolio. None of those disappear. In fact, they get enhanced with technology. They don't disappear. So I can assure everyone on this call that if you look at the title of this presentation, there is a future for the city. It just looks different from what it is today.
Thank you, Dikshit. And Vishesh, I was going to say that you've had the privilege of serving on the board of Lloyd's of London as Chief Risk Officer at Astor Managing Agency. We have seen one of the oldest establishments in the city have to move out of a culture of presenteeism to the home environment. How do you think they're coping?
I think they're coping remarkably well. And I think it's a change that was much needed. And without the pandemic, it would not have happened. So we really have something to cheer about from the pandemic. I mean, actually, once it's possible, the underwriting room will resume as previously, but at 50% of capacity. That means that there will be a significantly greater amount of e-trading, which therefore opens up those broker relationships internally to a much wider range of potential underwriters. So therefore, the market can actually have much more competition. So a traditional site around Lloyd's has been seeing brokers taking risks with big file of faxes full of papers to various syndicates. Those days going is not a bad thing. It means that risks can be placed electronically and they can actually be bound. Bound is when you are tied down and you've signed that you are taking a risk on, and they can be bound in a much more efficient way. The data can be held in a much better way than when slips are signed manually by hand. I think it's a much needed boost, and we'll look back in 10 years' time and really think that this was a change maker for Lloyd's.
You're very passionate about cyber risk, and obviously it's a term that we see across the financial services industry all the time at the moment. What is your advice to graduates about the understanding of cyber risk, and what does it really mean?
So cyber risk is the risk from any type of cyber peril, whether that be a malicious external peril, such as a hacker, whether that be the risk that somebody within your organization poses just because they accidentally spill data. What every graduate needs to understand is that there are certain aspects of cyber hygiene, like having complex passwords, like changing your passwords, like treating your laptops and your connections into the office as secure and vulnerable, and not being blasé about the risk you pose to the organization. Emails coming in. So we've just seen Twitter being hacked in the last few days for a large Bitcoin scam. This was done by a fairly amateurish individual who was able to perform a wide-scale fraudulent campaign as a result. And this is just from social engineering. This is just from sending emails that people think are real and therefore trick people into giving up their passwords. We all need to be really, really vigilant when we're dealing with what might potentially give people the ability to get into our accounts. And we need to do that for the sake of our companies. There are a large number of businesses that are seeing significant difficulty from the fact that cyber ransoms are being asked of them that are taking their profits for maybe a full year in order to make them be able to operate again.
Thank you, Visesh. Kinner, just within the oil and gas industry, I mean, the former Bank of England governor recently has asked for commitment and sponsorship from a number of CEOs around carbon emission. How much do you think we're doing, and are we doing enough in the ESG space?
I think the honest answer, if I say as at today, the industry hasn't done enough. We're way behind the targets, the net zero carbon emission targets. And I think all of us will have seen in the news the significant force and attention the likes of Extinction Rebellion, as an example, have really brought to the attention of corporates and governments how far behind we are on that journey. And I think society is changing rapidly. The world's carbon resources are finite and running out fast. But what these messages that society is shouting about is we want affordable and reliable energy, but we want cleaner energy. And therefore, the big challenge ahead for all energy companies is a significant level of investment that's required to effectively replumb and rewire the world's energy system. So I guess just taking examples, you can see the world is electrifying at pace, and renewable energy is now seen as the future. Consumers, whether it's transportation or retail convenience, the likes of Tesla, Uber, Amazon, they're a sign of the future. And inevitably, society will be shifting away from their reliance on fossil fuels. And what's critical now, and this is what I sort of drew on at the start, was for energy companies to be successful in 10, 20 years' time, it's really ensuring they can make this energy transition. And what that means is understanding what the consumers in countries, cities, and industries demand as bespoke solutions, whether it be for energy, mobility, or decarbonization. And I think I think the positive around this is, I mean, a lot of people will on this call will be shareholders in some of the FTSE companies and the big oil and gas companies. They have a healthy balance sheet, healthy income stream right now, and I think this is the turning point. Right now, it's really thinking about how strategically we can divert some of that capital to the significant investment that's required today for 10 years down the line, and make that energy transition. And I think the strategies that these companies are now releasing to the market is thankfully reflecting that.
Kinner, you've been involved in some of BP's biggest expansions, and one of the things that comes to mind, certainly from all of what we're hearing around COVID-19, is the lack of carbon footprint as a result of the lack of air travel and the lack of movement. What do you think is going to change for your industry considerably, given all of the reputational damage that it's also seen over a period of years as it comes back from lockdown and moving back to sort of life as normal, if you like?
Yeah, so I think the lockdown has taught all of us a lot the last 6 months, as an industry, as a company, and as individuals as well. So as an industry, I think it's as a company and as an individual, it's taught us that actually there is a need for change. So, and I've talked about the low carbon energy transition and the strategy to move forward at a much more significant pace than we've actually really committed to over the last 20 years. And really what's accelerating that thought process is the fact that, you know, post-COVID, capital budgets are significantly tight. It's really forcing these companies to think, where do we need to make the investment today for the next 10, 20 years? So very difficult decisions are being made to actually think about what really is high quality or residual barrels of oil and gas versus what is actually the future, and what do we need to invest in the future today. And I think that if we're able to strike that balance and get it right, I think that will unlock all the aspirations for the future.
Thank you very much, Kinner. So Dikshit, then, I mean, all of you on the panel today, I have the pleasure of knowing you on a personal level. And so it, I guess to some extent, allows me to ask some deeper questions. Dikshit, I mean, I've been struck over the years at your the sort of sense of value and morals in which you lead your business. I could count on my one hand, the number of senior Indians at your level within the banking industry. And what I do know about you is that you are vegan, you are teetotal, you don't seek to play golf with your peers, but more above that, your sense of giving back and your sense of spirituality in the way that you lead your business is incredibly important to you. Can you comment on that and give the viewers a little bit more on that?
Sure, Nishma. I think firstly, look, it's an incredible privilege to, be walking in kind of the path that I've been walking. And, to be able to get the experiences that one gets, I'd like to say sort of it was by design. I can assure you it wasn't. There are some formative moments that really change your path. There are doors that open for you, at the right time. Again, if you knock on enough doors, there'll be one that will open. So to an extent, you have to try and create your own luck. But the journey you're on really takes you to places that you don't expect when you begin the journey. So, irrespective of kind of where you go, irrespective of where you live, irrespective of the roles you have, irrespective of the profile you have, and quite frankly, irrespective of the responsibility you have, which all obviously comes with the types of positions that we hold. What doesn't change is who you are when you go back home. What doesn't change is, your roots. What doesn't change, whether that's family, whether it's your roots in the community, whether it's, your dharma. And, I think that's important to preserve. And in my mind, it's not just, respecting our traditions and being immersed in, in our way of life. It's more that it actually is a source of strength. It's what's helped, me get through the tough days. And I can assure you there's a tough day every other day in banking. And to be able to get through those tough days, it's really, you lean back on who you really are. And, I'm really thankful to, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, and my family today, for all, sort of supporting and being around, but also, to my parents to give, for giving me that sense of integrity, guidance, morals, ethics, which have helped anchor me. So I think having that anchor is super important. And then around there, yes, the whole world swirls, of course. And, I think that's an important trait of leadership is, with the hurricane around you, the ability to kind of stay steady, is important. But I think, our values are what, helps in situations like that.
Thank you, Dikshit. And I think you've been incredibly humble, because I know all of the work that you've done in South Africa, but even in the UK with charities such as Brotham and City Hindus Network. And it's much appreciated that you've joined us today as well. So Visesh, hard work, commitment, the amount of years that we spend doing exams, profiling ourselves in the industries, all of that is a cliche. And often when I see the generation coming through, I wonder whether they're expecting things much more on a plate. There is a sense of entitlement, if you like. What's your view on that? And how much of your career is down to hard work versus luck?
I definitely think you create your luck, as Dikshit just said. He's absolutely right. I mean, my early part of my career was passing through the actuarial exams, and you need a significant level of determination in order to be able to do those. They're not exams to be taken lightly, but that alone is not enough to then take you through your career. There will be challenges that you will have to face in terms of some of the projects that you will be given, whether you're in a consultancy, whether you're in a company, that then shape the view that others have of you and shape what you might be given going forward. Again, echoing Dikshit's sentiments, broadening your network and making sure that others know about you and taking that forward with something you're passionate about is really helpful, because it may be the case that some of those things that you talk about publicly, some of those things that you share publicly, so we do a lot of research for the Institute around cyber risk at this moment, don't pay off immediately, but sometimes pay off later down the line. So for example, a cyber modeling startup has asked me to join its advisory board as a result of some of the work that I've been doing over the last couple of years. Now, I would never have known that was going to happen when I initially started this. I did it because I was passionate about it. I think that the value and the investment from making sure you're committed to what you're doing and being passionate and following a path that you're passionate about cannot be understated.
Thank you, Visesh. And Kinner, it goes without saying that when you have a role that involves, for all three of you, actually a huge amount of travel and time away from family and home, there are a huge amount of sacrifices that are made as well. And Kinner, I know you've had a lot of those sacrifices along the way. How do you get round the question of work-life balance, and does it really exist?
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't go in blindly into working for a company like BP, which is a global company, which equals a lot of travel. And one of the things that excited me about joining BP was that I actually get access to and exposure to many different types of businesses across globe, as opposed to Western centric. So the first half of my career, I would say I was away from home a lot. I mean, I come from a very family orientated background, and you could say a fairly conservative upbringing as well. So initially, it was a case of a mindset shift, really to think about how do I steer my career in an organization such as this. And one of the things I did pick up on was that career mobility and flexibility was key. And that initial investment has taken me a long way as a result of that sacrifice. But, how do I manage that? My wife, she works for a bank in Canary Wharf and has a very demanding career as well. And so like me, for the first 10 years or so of our marriage, we rarely crossed paths, bare a couple of hours in the evening. And that all worked and we managed. But when kids came into the mix, so our two lovely daughters arrived, that's where, where the priorities sort of, we had to think about what are our priorities and how do we strike the right balance. And so it's a case of how do we maintain and progress our careers, but also ensure our kids don't fall short of any attention or much needed guidance at such a young and vulnerable age. And I think for us, and I know before I even say this, I know I'm spoiled, but for us, the ticket to success has really been our extended family. So my parents play a pivotal role in both mine and my wife's life, managing everything associated with the children's welfare, and logistical issues caused by our busy schedules. And I think to look at this positively, and what I feel really proud about being brought up in this sort of culture is it does give us a competitive advantage in that we have such a strong support network that we can all progress together as a team, as a family, the four of us, including my parents, but also maintain balance for our children and ourselves. So yeah, I think a lot goes down to our culture and how we support each other.
Thank you, Kinner. And I think that just brings me on to the next subject, which is really family culture and also our children, right? And I think, Dikshit, you have three wonderful daughters, London's leading independent school, destined for great things in life. When I read the FT on Friday, which I'm sure you did, Dikshit, it was very much saying that it will take 2 generations before we reach gender parity. How do you feel about that? And what's the conversation at your dinner table?
Well, with 3 teenage daughters, I can assure you, Nishma, that I get direct feedback in a way nobody else would give me. Look, it's a different generation that they're growing up in. I mean, look, you're an example of success, in the city, and not just success, but naturally, female as a successful female as well, even more rare. Times were different for you, and times are really different from them. For them, I think it's they're more aware than probably your generation was when you started. So it's not that they're unaware of the issues. They realize what goes on. They see the statistics. They see the campaigns, and they question. They say, "What are you doing about it?" And they'll ask me about it. They say, "What are you doing about it?" I mean, I'll describe my team, and I'll describe my executive committee, and again, there's a real shortage of females in the city, and we struggle, and they'll keep looking at me and saying, "What are you doing about it?"
Absolutely,
and
I was going to ask
so
you
I don't
that,
get much
Dikshit.
sympathy, so no sympathy, but it motivates. My motivation there is clear, that we have a lot more work to do. I do have a better appreciation, now seeing them come up to university age, and then realizing what are the kinds of careers that I would want to see them in. What's the male-female ratio at university like? What will it be like when they go into the workplace? And it does bring home the fact that, as a society and as businesses, we have a lot more work to do. That said, there's plenty of successful female role models like yourself and others. And I think it's important that we continue to showcase, leverage the role models that are there, because it's no good having, great, successful males trying to tell them how important it is for females to come into, all of these, great careers. I think they do respond positively to role models. So I think that's an important contributing factor. I think another is that firms have to do a lot more work, at 2 levels. The graduate level, when you bring candidates in, is probably the easiest level where you can get the.
Have we just lost Dikshit there?
I think so.
Okay, so we got Dikshit back? No, we've just lost him on service. Okay, so I will come back to a series of questions for Dikshit based around that. And Visesh, if I was going to turn that on its head and say you have a 4-year-old son who's just about to enter the education system, and is going to come out the other end quite oblivious to the fact that there is this issue of gender parity or gender difference with two individuals in the household who both have careers. What would you be saying to your 4-year-old son who's entering the education system, and what would you hope that comes out of him at the other end? We've got Dikshit back. Dikshit, I'm just going to come back to you as just thank. Oh, we've got Dikshit back.
Hi, sorry, I don't know where I got cut off.
We just finished on that, Dikshit, which was wonderful. And I was going to bring you on to the fact that there is, no sugarcoating the fact that we are undergoing a social crisis at the moment on the back of the tragic killing of George Floyd in the US. But as a South African Indian yourself, who's sort of seen or been sort of party to this sort of apartheid movement, if you like, you are very conscious of some of what goes on in the city as well around discrimination. I have been very surprised, shocked at the level of conversation at the moment around racism, and open conversation, the first time in my career, about racism in the city. Tell me, Dikshit, have you ever faced discrimination? And what does all of this mean for you as a leader at a German bank?
Sure, and I'll probably just relate one personal experience that I had. When I was leaving university, I had a standard form letter that said, from South Africa's largest bank, that said, we recruit the following types of people. If you're interested, call us. So I called them and said, sure, whatever these jobs are in banking. By the way, I had no idea. I'd like to be considered for one of them. And the fellow at the other end, this was apartheid South Africa, heard my accent, heard my name, I'm just presuming, and said, look, we don't have anything. And so I said, that's fine, give me your fax number, I'll send you my resume, hold it on file, and then, keep me in the queue. And he said, no, you don't need to do that, just call us next year. And I said, no, I really insist, I want to send you my resume. And, do me a favor and make me happy today and tear it up if you want. And he just wouldn't let me. Eventually he relented. I was persistent, and I sent him the resume. And actually that night I got a call from the CEO of the bank, which is quite exceptional. And the reason I mentioned that story is because when they looked at my resume and they looked at my results, kind of meritocracy trumped anything else. And fortunately, the person at the other end, the CEO, kind of also understood that. And I mention that because throughout my career, I have not personally experienced racism. I've experienced difficulties in a professional context. I've had to deal with the office politics and at the senior management level, the board politics that come with large organizations. I've had plenty of other difficulties, but I don't attribute any of those to a racist outlook within the system. Now, I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, the statistics, if you look at, forget, ethnic minorities and females, and, you mentioned, blacks. Actually, black representation is almost non-existent in many of these industries that we have. And so the numbers don't lie. We're not doing a good enough job. Now, whether you call that, whether you attribute that to some element of racism outright or sort of hidden bias, subtle bias, all of those may be relevant considerations, but we need to actually do a lot more work around it. And so, when I look around, I'm always cognizant that my personal experience doesn't mean we're getting it right. And, I may have just through sheer force, pushed through the issues. I've always been a fan of meritocracy. I've never been a fan of quotas that said, at times I do feel that quotas would help in any system like banking where you have incentives that, get things done. A quota is another incentive to get things done. And so, I do feel it's a huge issue for not just banking, but many of the industries that we have, whether it's, FTSE 100 boards that you look at, or it's representation at middle management level. There's a lot of work to do. And, the upside of sort of the George Floyd and, all of the sort of upswell of sentiment is that hopefully, we're all more sensitized, and also that companies start doing a lot more. And we've seen some really sort of good things in the early days. Again, this doesn't go away. I mean, you need to do this, as part of the muscle memory of your organization throughout.
So for a new graduate, Dikshit, that's joining the industry as and when they get to, given when we might see someone on unemployment and the lack of programs, if you like, what would your advice be to them? What was the advice you gave to the younger Dikshit Joshi?
So one is seek out people that you can sort of trust and rely on for advice. one thing that's guaranteed is you will not have all the answers. You will struggle with many topics that face you. Don't try and solve it on your own. Have people that you can go to and ask for advice. And inevitably, you may have the right answer, but after speaking to 3 or 4 people, actually, you'll be able to craft that answer in a much better way than you yourself could. At least that's been my personal experience, and I think it helps me even today, because inherently the world we operate in, as Vishesh will tell you as a risk manager, is highly uncertain, and we deal with risks, which mean volatility is a part and parcel of our daily life. And if you recognize that uncertainty is there every day, how do you actually kind of form solutions when you don't have all the answers? And the answers, you have the toolkit, and you have people that you can consult, and you can fill in the gaps. Mm-hmm. The second is, take some risk. And I always say this to young graduates, is that it's important to be approximately right rather than precisely wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty important. Do not go to the nth degree trying to solve the problem in its entirety. You may never get there. And anyway, things are so uncertain, your answer might not be relevant in any event. So get it as far as you can, rely on the people that you've spoken to, rely on the fact that you've done your homework. And yes, there's some risk attached to it, take some risk. And the third, if I were giving myself some advice, and I wish someone had done this at the time, is, get a life, have some work-life balance. Yes, of course, in the early days, work was everything for me. But, I wish someone had tapped me on the shoulder and said, just get out to the gym for an hour and come back, or sure. else. And so, that would be sort of what I would say to my younger self.
Thank you, Dikshit. That's super insightful and helpful. And thank you for being very honest. And Vishesh, just coming back to you on the earlier question that I asked, rather than repeating the question, really understanding what would you be saying to a 4-year-old little boy who's entering the education system? And what would you be hoping at the other end in relation to gender parity and gender diversity?
So I think a 4-year-old coming into this world knows no different, whether they be a girl or a boy, or they be of a color, or they be white. We shouldn't make them think that they're coming into a world that has any differentiation. They shouldn't be thinking that they have more opportunity or less opportunity than somebody that's come before. They should have an open mind. What we need to give to our next generation coming through is the ability to adapt to an environment that is going to change far more rapidly than any workforce, any previous generations have seen. We need to give them the resilience to be able to overcome the challenges and also to overcome the setbacks that will happen now that careers are so much more fragmented and that they need to be reinvented, on a more frequent basis than will have ever been in the past. And we owe them that, going through the period that we are and getting the experience that we are at this moment in time, as a set of values that we give them in addition to everything else.
But Vishesh, I would say that, if you think about the generation above us, they particularly still very much actually want their children to take a profession that is, of course, going to pay the bills, but is sort of valued in a certain way within society, be it the legal profession, be an accountant, and Kinner can come to that later as well, or being an actuary, right? And I think what's changed, has anything changed in your thinking, or would you still be considering or saying to somebody coming through the system or coming through university that actually you still need to go for a stable, in inverted commas, career?
I think that if you haven't found a passion and you haven't found something that you're prepared to put everything into and risk potentially not earning a very comfortable income doing, then of course following a professional career allows you to find that passion. And it may be the case that it takes a number of years before you do, but at least you have something behind you to fall back upon. If you're at the age where you're entering the workforce and you already know that you're prepared to commit your life for a particular cause or a particular belief, then you'll follow that, and you'll be so passionate that you'll know everything about it. And you may be fortunate that actually this is the next big thing, or you may be fortunate that that your passion becomes steered in a particular way through the interactions that you then have with others who have either a passing interest or a focused interest on that passion. So my advice is, wait until you have the passion, until you commit single-heartedly into following it, and be prepared to wait, 5, 10, 15 years, however long it takes, until you really know. People know at very different stages.
Thank you, Visesh. And Kinnor, I was going to come to you, and the very conventional profession, or that's seen particularly within the Oshwal community that we speak to today, is go and become a chartered accountant. The fact that you did that with the Big Four has probably got some icing on it as well. Tell us, would you do it again?
Would I do it again? Yes. so I could say that. I could say that because it's got me to where I am today. And I think when I draw back when I reflect on my career, I think those core skills, that discipline, and that exposure at that very young age to some very big companies, and just getting that feeler around, what do I want to do? Where can I see myself in these organizations? That was a fantastic stepping stone. So would I choose a route of a Big Four? Yes, and that's not to say any other medium size or other profession. It's a really fantastic stepping stone into the world of finance. But I think there's a different Kinnor that would be applying to a role in a Big Four today, if that was me, and that Kinnor would need to be a lot more flexible and open to change. And I think as Visesh also said, is everybody is reinventing themselves continually and evolving in this current climate. So I draw it back to accountancy. I mean, accountancy will always remain central to any organization's success, but will we really need accountants to do some of the tasks that people are doing today? And the answer is no. So currently, a large piece that I'm looking at quite closely is thinking about automation and artificial intelligence, and that is a threat to the profession. Effectively, a huge chunk of what people perceive an accountant to be and to do will go away, and that will go away at rapid pace. So back office operations and such like. So where does that leave an accountant, and where does that leave me wanting to aspire to be an accountant? And I think that's the point. I think that both Visesh and Dikshit made is you need to take a few risks, and actually you just need to keep on reinventing yourself and think about, actually it's more exciting prospect being an accountant now, because accountants now, my teams, they're retraining themselves to get technologically, digitally, to actually manipulate tons of data that typically we'd spend hours doing on a spreadsheet, and actually now because all that takes an hour instead of 4 days, an accountant actually focuses on much high value added services that can actually inform business decisions, as opposed to being at the back office. Accountant's role now is really at the front end, and therefore, what advice would I give to somebody, maybe thinking about an accounting profession? Don't wait. You should be thinking about, how do I make myself marketable? How do I make myself flexible? Accountancy is not just about debits and credits. It's now about how can you analyze data through using things like Power BI or
So what you would be saying, Kinnor, is that you would be advising your daughters to join the profession as well?
Yes. Yes, wholeheartedly. I wouldn't discourage it. I wouldn't. What the key thing is actually through all of this. So that's me. That's a Kinnor. But you really, unless you have a passion for what you do, you won't enjoy accounting. And if that isn't accounting, if that isn't finance, you will never succeed. What you really need to do is take a few risks and really understand what makes you tick, and actually do where your passion actually, where your instincts and passion actually sort of lead you to, rather than fit yourself in a box. And like I've just described, an accountant won't look like it is today in 5 years' time. So you can't bank on a 40-year career as a traditional accountant.
Thank you, Kinner. And I think, it's inevitable that I'm going to lead on to the question that I asked Dikshit earlier, which is, what is your commitment to diversity and inclusion? The oil and gas industry have been particularly poor from a gender perspective, from a race perspective, and wider as well. And I think that is well known. Dikshit, as a senior leader in the banking industry, has just made, I think, some pledges. I don't think Visesh has an option. So I'm handing over to you. What are you saying you want your daughters to grow up in? And what are the pledges as a senior leader within the oil and gas industry are you going to make?
So I think that's a fair summary. So when I joined the oil and gas industry 15 years ago, I was of one of a very small handful of ethnic minorities in a very white male dominated environment. But I'm pleased to say that through metrics or forced change, you do see the balance arriving. So whether that's through female representation or ethnic minority, and as I can, as for BP at least, say that the values really are seeping through in terms of diversity and inclusion. However, I think for me it's moved on from purely race and gender, etc. It's more really about inclusion. So my team and then all the teams around me have a good representation of females and ethnic minorities. However, what people don't really understand when they walk into work is their unconscious bias. So an Asian has a specific culture that it brings to the workplace and a specific tone. So they may be the quieter person in the room. How do you, as a leader, ensure that you've got a beautiful, diverse workforce? How do you ensure that that diverse contribution gets on the table? And that's really, for me, what diversity and inclusion is now about. In this, as at today, is it's actually race and gender will always be there as targets, but how do I ensure that there's a safe and comfortable environment for my team, such that they have no inhibitions about contributing their diverse opinions and perspectives into the room? And that is where we achieve success, not
Thank you, Kinner.
Not by the dominant person in the room.
Thank you very much, Kinner. And I'm just conscious that we are at the hour at the moment, but we've had a number of questions that have come through from our viewers, and I'm going to take some of those questions. We may not have the opportunity to take all of them today, and ask some of our panelists how they feel about some of these issues, challenges in the workplace. So the first question that we've had is, how will the future of the office be affected by the pandemic? I think you've all touched on that, but very briefly, Dikshit, what is the future of your office, the future of banking going to be after the pandemic?
Nishma, I think there's some level of sort of exaggeration when you look at, everyone working from home and, the experience that we've had, and, the office is doomed, and, we're never going back to offices. And by the way, it's great to be in the suburbs and you don't commute and all of that. I think that's not going to be the case. If you look at the value that comes, in having one of these jobs, and whether it's, in the oil and gas industry or your industry or any one of these, it comes from actually learning, and learning comes from being in proximity to people who actually have that, knowledge body around you. And you spend the time speaking to them, imbibing from them, you're in the right meetings and so on. And of course, yes, technology, a lot can be done with technology. I do think you can't really get that level of networking and knowledge, which actually forms, quite frankly, a lot of the backbone to what we do, sitting at home.
Yes.
And so, I think kind of we will be going back to offices. Yes, there will be some lessons learned from that. And one of those lessons will be that if we're able to do so many jobs kind of at home, why not do them in Pune? Why not do them in Manila and elsewhere? And so I think it's a trend that we've seen across the globe, lots more offshoring. Kinner mentioned kind of in the accounting world, how that's been, getting automated. I think you see a greater degree of automation happening, but I don't see the complete demise of the office. But I see particular roles moving away from kind of expensive locations, would be my view.
And do you think, Dikshit, one of the things that's been misinterpreted, I think, or misinterpreted around the future of work agenda has been that actually what people have been doing is bringing their offices home. So effectively they're on Zoom calls from 7 in the morning until 9 p.m. What we're actually saying about the change of role is that you completely change the way in which you work, and some roles will be eliminated as a result. But the fact that you don't actually need to be in an office-based location means that organizations can recruit from anywhere in the world. Do you think that that is actually possible within the banking industry and more broadly across the city?
I think it helps that you're not confined to location, but I'm still a believer that I think you will have congregations of staff for particular purposes in different locations, and I think it's going to be really hard to say, what I'll do is I'll recruit. I mean, it's kind of it seems idealistic that I can just hire the best people wherever they are. One could be sitting in Russia, one in the US, and I don't really care. I have the best talent. Try doing that logistically. Try never meeting them ever. Try and getting them at the same times on calls, etc. It becomes harder, and so I don't think that will be the case. I think we're more likely, again, as I said, to see clusters of people in lower cost locations where we can identify great talent.
Sure.
I think we'll have more flexibility around talent, and so working from home in this experience, no doubt, will mean that I've had it, with a senior member of my team who is looking to retire from the industry so that he could spend more time with his family, and has come back now and said, well, actually, if I could do what I'm doing now, I'm happy staying in the industry much longer because I see my family more. So I think you, on the margin, see some lifestyle changes, and hopefully that helps with retention of talent, and hopefully helps with retention of female talent a lot more than we've had before.
Great, thank you, Dikshit. And I think we've just had a question saying, do you have a view that some people say that today's graduates might have 2 or 3 different careers through their professional lives? And I think, Bisesh, although the theme of being an actuary and being in insurance has certainly stuck with you, you've been an entrepreneur through the Silicon Valley route, and been with some very old establishments like Lloyd's of London as well. And I think you've almost seen that. So it'd be great to get a comment from you on that question.
This comes back to what all of us have talked about in terms of following your passion and being adaptable throughout your career, recognizing what the changes are that are coming maybe down the track, and also adapting to those changes that might happen at a point in time. And what Dikshit was just talking about in terms of going back to the office, I think actually brings a huge potential change. He's absolutely right. There is a certain level of need to be in the office, and there is a certain amount you imbibe from it. But the opportunity that it brings is for much greater equality. Somebody who might need to fit their career around their children actually has the ability to spend some time in the office and go back home and work effectively, and potentially structure their meetings in such a way. So that's a challenge that's been brought about through the pandemic, which leads to an opportunity going forward. In the same way, industries are going to change. There are going to be focal points spread across the UK. This northern powerhouse, which has had a significant amount of money thrown at it in terms of our secondary and tertiary cities, will actually have much greater potential, because there can be specialist locations for roles over there, and there can be fluidity of talent to other areas which are lower cost but still UK areas.
And so are you saying that people are going to, just going back to the question, are going to be able to have 2 or 3 different careers through their professional lives? And is that something that you are advocating?
Yes, I think that the amount of change that is going to come going forward means that I wouldn't say 2 or 3. I'd say for some people it may be 2 or 3. Some people may end up having a number of different changes in their careers, just because of the route they take, and the fact that route ends up varying in how you might describe it over time, or ends up completely changing. So for example, retail, we can see that retail is going to just change significantly over the next year or two, as there is a much greater move to online shopping. So if somebody's in merchandising right now, I'd be I'd be thinking about, well, how do you change that to career to be online related, and potentially how you present a storefront from an online perspective?
Thank you, Visesh. And we've had another question, quite a lot of questions coming through actually, but we won't have time to take all of these questions today. But it's a very interesting one here. And I think both Visesh and Dikshit talked about profile. And I think, Kinner, you quite rightly said that a lot of our sort of family upbringing or backgrounds means that we're quite conservative about raising profile within the industries that we work in or serve. And the question that's come through is, do you believe that as a community, we are too reluctant to promote our people and therefore there are not enough role models promoted for the next generation to look up to? And Kinner, I was going to hand that one over to you if that's okay.
Sure, and I think that's a fantastic question, and I think that I can relate to that. So, like I said, when I joined the real world, I had all the straight A's behind me. I was a high achiever, but actually, when you put yourself in the real world, that's not enough. That's not enough. What we need to, I think, our parents and the generations before that were grafters, silent running grafters, and they never sought glory. They never sought to promote themselves. However, the world we live in, and I guess our children live in, and the people that they effectively compete with in industry or in any sort of sector industry, there is a level of arrogance that our peers have, and they may not have the 3 A's, but they do have. They are built to understand that they have that inner confidence built into them, and I think it's a quality of our community that we are humble and we don't boast, but I think there is something that we need to do to help our children to actually believe in themselves. And again, coming back to some of your points around diversity and inclusion, is really thinking about this is a very meritocratic society now, and we have all the opportunities that the other person on the street has. And how do we instill that confidence in our children is going to be key. And as a community, coming back to the question, what we can do to help, I think is very important in that space. Yeah.
Thank you, Kinner. We have the opportunity for one very last question. For people facing redundancies, which is inevitable in the current crisis, what advice are you giving? And what I'm going to do is go to each of you, if you could give a perspective from your industries around those at various levels that are going to be made redundant over the next 6, 8, 12 months. So Dikshit, from a banking perspective.
You know, it's a really, really challenging time, Nishma, and I don't think we have, you know, all the perfect answers here as to how we'll resolve the crisis. You know, there is a chance that, as I said, that, you know, we have, you know, a weak jobless environment for some time. Yes, you know, governments will step in like they have and support sort of, you know, the unemployed for temporary periods. But I think we may just have to get used to chronically higher unemployment compared to where we were before. Now, it doesn't help saying that to the person who's actually affected. You know, what I would say is that, you know, you do need to be flexible. And so, you know, if you were doing a job and, you know, you've been made redundant, just going and trying to find that exact role somewhere else, of course, is your first starting point. But you then need to start migrating to, you know, different roles that you wouldn't have considered before. I'm not saying lesser roles. I'm just saying, you know, roles that, you know, have elements to them that you would not naturally have liked to do or somewhat outside your comfort zone, and cast that pool as widely as you could and try and take a sort of more flexible role, you know, and await kind of more normalized conditions to come back when you can get back to the track that you're on. But I think it may remain difficult for some time, unfortunately.
And Dikshit, do you think that Brexit plus C19 is a double whammy?
So, you know, quite controversial in that, you know, Brexit, you know, my view is on Brexit that, you know, depending on the type of Brexit we actually get, which we're still not completely sure on, it may actually be good for Britain, in that I'm not expressing a political view, and, you know, I was a Remainer on the way in, but now that the decision's been made, you know, it may just mean that, you know, if we're able to get a Brexit and an administration here that is focused on, you know, less regulation, less red tape, spurring, for example, building like we're seeing now through the planning, relaxation of the planning process, growth initiatives, creating an investment climate that would attract foreign capital, etc. Actually, that could be a pretty good place to be. So I don't think this is necessarily, Brexit was, an overhang on us already. But I think this is just way more severe, than kind of the impact of Brexit on us.
Thank you. Visesh, are you optimistic or pessimistic in terms of bouncing back? And what's your advice to somebody senior being made redundant, or anyone being made redundant in the current crisis?
I wouldn't say I'm optimistic or pessimistic, because I can't forecast how long it will take to get a vaccine. And I think that is the essential part of the jigsaw. You need to actually work out how long it could take. What I would say is, coming back to your question of, the potential to be made redundant very soon or at some point within the next year, 18 months, really take the time to raise your profile in an area that you feel that you are passionate enough about to learn much more. So whatever that might be, whatever that subject might be, work out what it is. If it's related to what you currently do, great. Read about it, talk about it, find on social media, find people who are writing about it, start a discussion with them. If somebody's written an article and it's in that area, comment back. They may start a discussion with you. That may lead to a conversation whereby they get you involved in an initiative. This is all about building opportunities for the future. If you've already been made redundant, use that time that you have to do further learning. There are a huge number of online courses put out there by universities and other institutions that enable you to learn a subject for little or no money. And that's a huge opportunity with time. Obviously, this requires you to have the financial stability to do that, but it may be possible to take some sort of role and then work towards what your passion is going forward.
Thank you, Visesh. And Kinner, I'm 21. I've just graduated with a 2-1 from the London School of Economics or from Warwick. All of the banks I've applied to, all of the city firms I've applied to say, we don't know when we're going to start hiring graduates. What's your advice to them?
Don't waste time. I don't waste time, and actually think about your options. So we have some traditional options which were valid 6 months ago. Think about there's a whole wide world out there, and I think just we're talking about redundancy as that looming threat, and that's a forced change. So I'm not sugarcoating that. That will be difficult for many people, but actually in your career you are forced to take a lot of risks and seize opportunities. So it's I think it's just a little bit about mindset. Mm-hmm. Think about how you can shift gear and seize the opportunities around you. And just echo what Dikshit and Visesh said is, if you look around yourself, the opportunities should be there.
Thank you so much, Kinner. And on a slightly more positive note, the very final question for our panel today, and it only really requires a yes or no and one line behind it. Dikshit, do you think we're ready for an Indian Prime Minister?
I would say the short answer is yes. I would say, the country is always ready for a competent prime minister. The country is always ready for someone who's charismatic, a good leader who paints a vision. And so anyone who can do that, paint a vision, execute on it, and give us all a good direction and then keep us on that direction, I think is useful. And of course, there's great candidates like the Chancellor and others there, who could definitely fit the bill.
Thank you, Dikshit. Visesh?
I can do nothing but echo exactly what Dikshit has said. The Chancellor is a very good leader, and he's had the opportunity to show that to the nation. So he's opened the way for us to think about an Indian Prime Minister. Thank you.
And Kinner?
Yes, and not just the Chancellor, but I think if you look around London, so whether it's Asian or otherwise, there are very, very talented, successful people. And I think we're in a world where everyone has that opportunity. So yes, I don't see why not. No.
Thank you. And with that, we'll bring today's panel to a close. I'm so grateful to Dikshit Joshi, Visesh Gosrani, and Kinar Shah for joining us for a fantastic panel for over an hour and 15 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. And for all of those individuals who are listening and we haven't been able to capture your questions, please do send them on to Malaben and we will try and get back to you with some responses to those. But apart from that, have a lovely Saturday evening. Jai Jinendra and Namaste.
Thank you, Nishma. That was wonderful. You did a great job moderating the three panelists. I mean, we've heard some fantastic presentation there from all three of them. Within the same, if you like, same industry, the finance industry, but three diverse businesses, three diverse, completely different topics. So I think we've done pretty well. And your topic was, of course, future of the city. I personally think that, yes, with this pandemic has made sure that our lives have changed forever. And the same will probably be the future of the city. It will not be the same, but as Dikshit Bhai said, it's not also going to die away. It's still going to be there. And I do agree with him that, it's not always, although I have worked for the last 30 years sitting at home, except ending up in office when I'm traveling. But, my children, both of them, I mean, all three of them work from offices, and they're not, after 4 months, I think they're really looking at getting back to the office. And, whilst I've enjoyed having them here, and so sometimes, I feel that I have to coop up in my room when they work downstairs. The other thing, reaching for success, I think all three of you have done pretty well. All four of you, I should say. You're at the pinnacle, and I think you are good role models for our community. Kinar, of course, comes from a very illustrious family, I should say, because his mum was on the first committee of Oshwal Association. She is in that photograph, and I mean, I've known his uncle, K.D. Shah, and I know his dad is a very close friend of mine. His cousins, his uncles, I've worked with all of them. So, one thing that he mentioned, that our community, I would like to say that, we need people like you to now come forward and help us to promote our community within the younger generation, the next gen, because we've done our bit. I can tell you, we have actually initiated a program where we invited people to come and join an internship, unpaid internship, to work with us on the Oshwal media program. And we've got like a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 22-year-old. These 4 kids have come in and they have really done well over the last 4 or 5 weeks. They have taken it up. They've brought in some very fresh ideas. And my request to, I'm not saying you guys personally, but Kinar, Nishma, Visesh, Dikshit Bhai, of course, is not with the Oshwal community, but I'm sure you know a lot of Oshwals. Please,
Plenty.
This is the way I think.
He does know plenty. He probably knows more than I do, Kaushik Bhai.
But the important thing, yes, is that, we need to go out there and say, look, we've done it. You guys can do it. And, let's devote a little bit of our time for the community. So I've done this for 45 years and I mixed it with my work, traveling, and personal life. And I have thoroughly enjoyed serving the community. I'm sure, Ashish, Malaben, and the others who are in the community, who are doing things. It's not always easy, but even a couple of hours a week, perhaps to start with, please put the word out there. We need more and more people like you guys who can go out and raise our profile. And it would also help the people, like you said, the youngsters who are going to be coming out of university or going into university, that they have people to look up to, people who have made it. So once again, thank you all so much for spending your time on a valuable time on a Saturday evening. I have a habit of not leaving the mic, but now I'm going to leave Malaben to say the rest. Thank you so much. And good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in this wonderful, insightful webinar by Dikshit Bhai, Visesh Bhai, and Kinar Bhai, and our moderator, Nishma Ben. I would like to leave you with the thought that all of them put together, what I picked up, and what I would say is that stay positive, take the opportunity that comes to you, Don't knock it down. Make sure that you grow your network. Reach out to people. If you don't ask, you will regret it. You will say, I wish I had. Just like we say, I wish I was with you on a holiday. How much time do we spend when we want to go on holiday? We spend months trying to put it together. So why don't you all, listening on, spend at least 5 minutes to ask somebody that question? So panel, thank you so much again for your time and your beautiful way of putting it all together. And thank you, Ishma, for this this evening. So to all the participants and audience, thank you for taking part. Thank you for putting your questions forward. And we look forward to seeing you in the near future. Jai Jinendra.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.